Hey everybody, welcome back to Spilled Theory. I wanted to apologize for the hiatus. I'd been feeling drained about a lot of things, and now I'm kind of back to a sort of normal routine. I'm working again. And lately there had been more uncertainty, and I found myself kind of returning back to Built to Spill, kind of out of a comfort zone or comfort food. So a couple fun little Built to Spill news things to get out of the way. There is a repressing of the Halo Benders album, The Rebel's Not In. It's an amazing album. If you haven't heard it, you should check it out. It's probably up there with my top, 10, 5 or 10 things Doug's done. And so it's you should totally check it out. And there was a random rumor from a fan on the Facebook page that the next album could possibly be called When the Wind Forgets Your Name and could be out in 2022. I don't have any other information about that, but I'm excited whenever we do find out more. So anyway, I just wanted to get this out there. This was recorded back in April. Sorry to Troy for not getting it out sooner, but it was an interesting conversation, and I hope you enjoy it.
Yeah, I've been listening to your podcasts and stuff, and I found them enjoyable. So yeah, this was pretty cool.
So I'm curious, how did you get into music?
Well, I started playing drums when I was pretty young, like when I was in grade school, going to junior high. And then as far as like getting involved in local music and stuff, some friends of mine started a punk rock band like around 85, 86 or something like that. And we've been going to shows locally, and State of Confusion was kind of like the big deal around town. State of Confusion ended up being a lot of the guys from Treepeople and stuff. And anyway, I got to become friends with those guys, and I was hanging out with Pat, and Pat was kind of the guy who would set up all the shows and stuff. And he asked us to open a couple shows. I think he gave us our first big punk rock show when we played with Descendants, like in 86 on Thanksgiving or something like that. And anyway, but I'd gotten to know Pat a little bit before that. And then, I was telling him, hey, anytime you want us to do a show, and he's like, hey, set up your own damn shows and I'll show you how to do it. And so he, brought me down to this place in Garden City, which is kind of like this little town inside of Boise, to show me with the guy to talk to set up my own shows and stuff. And so I started doing my own shows based upon that. And Pat was always kind of the guy I'd go to ask, like, how do I handle this? What do I do? I don't have enough money to pay the bands or whatever, and he basically told me, it's like, well, if they have a place to stay and food to eat, usually you make enough to give them gas money to go to the next show, and kind of encouraged me to do that. And so, Pat was always kind of like my big brother acolyte, kind of guided me along through all that stuff. And so that's how I got to meet, Pat, Small John, and Scotty, and Wayne Flower in State of Confusion. And so we played shows together in my punk rock band. It was called USA at the time, United States of Apathy. It's a horrible punk rock band name, but anyway, that was our band name. And so we did some shows with them. And then a little bit later, I ended up being in a band called Dunce Cap with one of the members from USA, and then another guitar player. We were playing this punk rock house show called the Fifth Street House. And, we were playing Dunce Cap and State of Confusion, but Wayne Flower, who's the bass player, was playing drums, and Doug was playing bass. And they were playing like all their mid-tempo stuff, which was cool, but I was kind of drunk and like, hey, play the fast stuff. And Wayne looked at me and goes, I can't play that fast hardcore shit. I'm just going to just, I can only do this. I'm like, I could do all that stuff because I had their demo tape, and I'd been practicing along with their demo tape for a while. So I jumped up on stage with them and played like about 7 of their fast songs and stuff. And then shortly after that, those guys, Scotty and Wayne, had called me and asked me if I wanted to play drums in State of Confusion, because Eric wasn't really into it anymore. They weren't making any money, and it was kind of a downer for him. And so wanted to know if I'd play. So, so for about, 8 or 9 months, I played drums in State of Confusion, right when their second album, A Street, had come out. And then shortly after that, it was kind of cool because like I'd be practicing, I'd show up to practice for State of Confusion, but right about that time, Doug had been hanging around with State of Confusion guys, and that's, kind of how I met him. And they had started kind of jamming together and started, they didn't even have the name Treat People yet, but they were putting together these songs. And I remember one day I showed up to State of Confusion practice, and right at the end of what would become Treat People, and they played like the squirrel bait tune called Kid Dynamite. And then I heard it outside of the room, and I came in the room, I'm like, oh my God, that's amazing. And so they played it again for me, and I was like, oh my gosh, it really seemed like something special. I mean, State of Confusion was awesome, but man, what they were doing there was really awesome. And then that eventually became the Tree People, and then the Tree People became a pretty big thing in the Boise area. So yeah, it was kind of like a thing. I started as a young punk kid, hung out with those guys, got to play in State of Confusion, and then kind of watched the birth of the Tree People, which is pretty cool.
Interesting. Cool. Yeah, so as I got really into Built to Spill, I figured there has to be more music like this, and I learned about all the side projects and kind of a little bit of the history. But one thing, as somebody that's like kind of younger, and I live on the East Coast, and I wasn't around at the time, and so I had no idea how big I think Tree People was. But I think it was from either the talk with Jim or Brett that I realized that it was a really big band in that area.
Yeah, it was. I mean, Tree People was the band, from, 88 to 90, right before they went to Seattle. I mean, they were the king band. I mean, they opened for all the great big groups that were coming through, and then also they headlined lots of their own local shows. And they just kind of had that sound that everybody loved, and I loved too. I was a huge Tree People fan, so, and, I had my own couple bands, Tree People, Dunce Cap, and then Psychic Knot was another local punk rock band that I was in. So we played with those guys a lot, and then they moved to Seattle and continued to do their thing, and so, yeah, they definitely had something special. I mean, they would have no problem drawing, 200 to 300 people easy at a club show. And then, playing in the park and stuff, get like 500-600 people coming to see the Tree People. They just had that thing. And a lot of it had to do with, Doug's magic of just writing great songs. I mean, Scotty and also Pat had great tunes, and Wayne as well, but Doug was really the most prolific songwriter among them, and it's really Doug's songs, in my opinion, that really kind of resonated with everybody, and so definitely resonated with me.
Yeah, cool. That's really interesting. The so from what I gather, you mentioned there how you met Doug, and then that Doug was there from the beginning of Tree People. Is that right?
Doug was hanging out with the SOC guys, and so and I was hanging out with the SOC guys too, and Doug was already, he'd already been in a couple bands, and even this one band called Suiciety that had the drummer from Dirt Fisherman, which is another big local Boise band, and ended up doing some making some noise and stuff like that. And I remember seeing them open for the Descendants about a year before we played with the Descendants. And so that was the first time I saw Doug on stage. I'm like, oh, who's that guy? But then when I was hanging out with the SOC guys, it just like I got to know Doug a little bit. And then it's kind of like, me and Doug are essentially the same age. And so we were kind of like the younger brothers of those dudes, and
okay.
Seeing him hang out and then jam with those guys. Then that Fifth Street show when he was playing bass for State of Confusion while Wayne Flower was playing drums, which essentially ended up kind of becoming a version of what the Tree People eventually became,
Cool. Do you know some of the reasons that pointed towards them choosing the name Tree People?
Oh my gosh. Wayne Flower, I don't know if I'll have to send you the link. He has a really great Boise music history blog.
Okay.
And he talked in depth about how they ended up getting that name. And it was sort of a convoluted thing where, oh my gosh, what are they called? Like the Tree Folks or something like that. They wanted to have something to do with like trees, but there ended up being that there was another local band, like a cover band that had the same name. And so they kind of changed it into Tree People. Okay. To kind of get away from that. And so that just kind of stuck, it was kind of a secondary choice. I will send you the link for that Boise music history blog that Wayne has created that kind of goes to that evolution of where they got that name. But Yeah,
Okay.
that's kind of, the name kind of came from like, oh, that band already has the Tree Folks or something like that, so we'll call ourselves the Tree People. So
Okay, cool. I think I have seen that blog. I can try to link to that like in the show notes or something. But it's funny. There's a couple of bands I guess that might have been around at the same time and have a similar sound that I was a fan of, and they have like a pretty similar name history too. Dinosaur Jr. and Superchunk both like were going to be named different things. I think Dinosaur, there's a conflict with like a R&B band, so they did
yeah,
Dinosaur Jr. And then it was going to be Chunk because there was a naming mishap in mailing, and then I think there was some other kind of weird thing, and so they became Super Chunk then.
yeah, it's
So
funny because like when Dinosaur came out, I mean, they were just Dinosaur, and then all of a sudden, like their album started to be called Dinosaur Junior, and at the time, there was no internet and stuff like that. It's like, what the heck happened? And then so just by word of mouth, found out like they ran into some sort of legal thing with another band called Dinosaurs, so they call themselves Dinosaur Junior, which apparently made them sidestep that entire thing. But yeah. So
yeah, yeah,
they
that's
had the
cool.
origins.
Um, of the band, are there favorite songs or albums that you have that really remind you of that time?
Of the Tree People.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, honestly, it's like Time Horror was like a 12-inch that was really a big album for us, and that was after they moved to right about the time they moved to Seattle, like almost exactly the same time. But their first single that they put out that has handcuffs on it. That was when they were still in Boise. But honestly, it was their demo tape called No Mouth Pipetting, which we just
Mm-hmm.
repressed into an album for our last recent reunion tours.
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of like the thing that everybody had and everybody listened to. And so those guys would, basically that was their set for a while, before they moved to Seattle, and definitely took on a harder edge. And so it was really kind of um, a pleasant surprise, when Guilt, Regret, and Embarrassment came out, because my gosh, I mean, in a year and a half, those guys had changed in such a tight rock and roll unit, and Guilt, Regret, and Embarrassment was such a powerful record. I mean, I just couldn't believe it's like in a year and a half, they moved from Boise to Seattle, and then they put out this really gritty, awesome, dark, melodic album that was still had the Tree People sound, but definitely had a different edge to it, and
Mm-hmm.
so, I mean, Guilt, Regret, and Embarrassment is my favorite Tree People album of all time. But it's interesting to see that evolution going from the demo tape of No Mouth Pipetting to Time Horror to Guilt, Regret, and Embarrassment. It was a really quick evolution, but it was pretty awesome.
Cool. Yeah, so I came across now No Mouth Pipetting because Doug at a few solo shows played Bus 8, and I really like that song. It's like super introverted and relatable to somebody maybe about high school age,
Oh
and
my!
it is kind of typical Doug songwriting jam.
Oh, totally. And I love the fact that he still wants to play that song. We actually right before, well, not right before. It was last summer, like around July or August or something. Somebody was doing like a benefit in their backyard, raising money for some political cause or something like that. And so this was mostly through Scotty. And so we played in some guy's backyard, and we only did like 7 or 8 songs, and Bus 8 was one of them. And I just love that song so much.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that we still were able to bring that out and play it, I just love the fact that we get to play that song even still. So.
Yeah, yeah, it's a good one. Uh, let's see. So one thing I've noticed about Tree People and sometimes continuing into Built to Spill is I think a lot of the art seems to be done by Mike Shear. Do you know how that connection might have happened?
Yeah, Mike. Well, Mike was a Boise guy, and so Mike was around back before I was even around. So, like, Wayne and Scotty and Mike Shear were kind of around the punk rock scene in like 1983 and stuff like that, 84. And so I'm not sure. I think they all went to school together and stuff like that, and so that's where that connection came through.
Okay.
And they just like their art a lot, and so Doug just kind of carried that through Tree People all the way through to Built to Spill too.
Yeah.
And Mike is lovely guy. You know, I have a tattoo of guilt, regret, and embarrassment on my shoulder. You know, and I just love his art and stuff like that. So yeah, so those guys have been friends for a real long time, you know, and I think that Mike Shear basically he's part of the older crew, you know, even though he's like, I mean, Scotty, Wayne, and Pat, and those guys were just, you know, only like, you know, 5-6 years older than me and Doug, but they were kind of like the older brothers of the punk scene, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it's cool that it's kind of, I mean, to me, who isn't super connected to the band, it's almost like Mike Shear's art style is the brand of Doug's music, in some ways.
I feel that 100%, you know, and it's like, it really comes through, and it was really cool because like when we first did those initial reunion shows as Tree People, like at the in Portland, you know, Mike came up on stage and just basically freestyling art on stage while we were playing, you know, which was really cool. And so, yeah, he's definitely an integral part of the early parts of Tree People. And then, like I said, the continuity just goes all the way through with Built to Spill.
Yeah, cool. One thing I was curious about with Tree People, I think some Built to Spill fans have heard their version of Clouds in My Coffee, titled Flies in My Coffee, and it's a super neat cover, and I was wondering if you knew how that happened. And it to me, it kind of seems like it might have been a hint at the way that Built to Spill approaches cover songs, and like they're so diverse, so faithful, and so interesting.
Yeah, you know, unfortunately, I don't know the origins of that because that was, you know, before I was involved in like the creative process of that whole thing. But I mean, I think you've hit the nail on the head. I mean, like Doug is very interested when he does covers. He's very true and faithful to the original version, and that's definitely one that they kind of put on put on its head. You know, it's a little bit different than before. Whereas, like, you know, the stuff that he was doing Built to Spill, the cover versions are very true to the original. You know, just with his own style on it. You know, but yeah, I don't know exactly where that came from for sure.
Okay, sure. And I was wondering, maybe in live shows or other things, did they do other covers that you remember that were surprising?
Um, um, you know, I'm trying to think. You know, gosh. I mean, they used to do Wild World, you know, by Cat Stevens.
Oh, that's a good one. I think I might have heard a recording of that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that was around the time of the No Mouth Pipetting demo tape era, you know. And so that one, and then also Pale Blue Eyes.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
So they were doing that way back then, you know.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
Cool. So I gather some of those decisions might have been kind of group decisions, or it could be Doug, you know, suggesting to do stuff like that.
Right. You know, and also, you know, back then, I mean, Pat was really kind of a very large guiding force in all of our lives. You know, I mean, he was kind of the guy that showed us how to do everything. And so I'm sure that Doug bringing those songs to the band and stuff was pretty evident. It's like, hey, this would be pretty rad to do. But I can't imagine that none of that stuff would have went through unless Pat was okay with it, you know?
Sure. Yeah. And so he does seem to be a pretty strong part in Tree People and Origins in Built to Spill, and a motivating factor. And when I saw him appear on There Is No Enemy, in that story, it struck me because about at the same time I lost one of my best friends from growing up. He passed away from a blood clot in his brain, and I think in a way that kind of mirrors the previous drummer in Built to Spill. I gather that I think that's kind of similar to how surprisingly he passed away. And just hearing some of those losses ended up being ways that I dealt with that in my life, and so yeah, I think of experiencing that album and remembering that, and that it had to have been a different thing for Doug at the time, but but that it kind of helped me get through.
Yeah, I mean, like I think something that me and Doug have very much in common is how much of a huge presence Pat was in both of our lives, just showing us how to just do the rock and roll thing, you know. And I remember I was working in Virginia for my job, and I had come home and I had bought that album, and I was driving down Eagle Road in Boise, Idaho, and that song came on, and it just killed me. And I ended up pulling over the side of the road. I was just in tears. It was just
Yeah.
so beautiful. I just called Doug right then on the side of the road on Eagle Road and just told him, I said, this is just the most beautiful tribute to a man that had such a huge impact on our lives. You know, I mean, Pat was a lovely man. I mean, he was, you know, he could be difficult. You know, he was, his nickname was Pat Brown, you know, and so Pat Brown is the song from the Vandals, Peace Through Vandalism. And so if you listen to that punk rock album, Pat Brown is kind of like this renegade, wild man and stuff like that. And Pat was kind of like that too. You know, Pat was full of energy in lots of different directions. You know, he was lovely. He could be unpredictable. You could have great times with Pat. You could have scary times with Pat. You know, he just never knew what happened, but at the same time, he also had a vision for how to move things forward and show you how to make things happen. And so that song on that album was just such a lovely tribute to a man that still has an impact on all of us today, you know, and honestly, just like even during the reunion and stuff, his name, he still loomed large over everything that we were doing. You know, there was nothing lost on us that, you know, we were doing this in the absence of Pat. And also another tribute to it is that, you know, the songs that we did on that tour, we didn't do any songs that weren't original Pat songs, you know, that Pat had played on. And so because that was kind of an important thing where we wanted to kind of stay true to the original 4-piece and do only songs, you know, basically up through Something Vicious for Tomorrow. And that was it, you know, and so it was kind of want to stay true to that. And I was so thankful to be even included in that because honestly, I'm a drummer, just like I don't play bass, you know, and so when they asked me to play, I kind of mistakenly assumed that I'd be playing drums, you know, and then so I thought, oh, well, Wayne's an amazing bass player, Halo Benders, you know, State of Confusion, all that stuff. And then I posted something on Facebook with all these new cymbals I was going to buy for what I thought was going to be the reunion tour. And then had to call me up. It's like, no, you're going to play bass. You know, Wayne's going to play drum, just like the original lineup. I'm like, Doug, I don't play bass. I play guitar. He goes, well, I've seen you play guitar. And Doug has recorded some of my bands where I sing and play guitar, but I'm really just kind of like a campfire, you know, full chord guitar player, you know? And so I'm like going, okay. And I'm like, are you sure this is, this will work? He's like, I know you can do this. This will be fine. We'll walk you through it. And I was like, okay, you know, I had faith in it. And it's just like, so I went and got myself a bass rig. And actually the first bass that I played with rehearsing was a bass that Brett Nilsson, you know, he had while he was playing and built a Spill, but it was a bass that he didn't really like. It was a Fender. It's a Fender. It's a nice Fender Jazz Precision bass, but he didn't like it, you know? And so he just like, he gave it to Doug when he left the band. And so when Doug was like, hey, come by my house and I'll give you a Bristol bass. And so I was learning on that. And it was a large scale bass. And I was trying my best, but it just like, gosh, I just couldn't seem to get it right, you know? And luckily I had my bass player in my band from Dunce Cap in USA. He was still my friend, and he's a really great bass player, Dave Wall. You know, he played in a band called System and Station, which is an amazing band, and which evolves currently into this band called Last Giant. They're still from Portland and stuff. But anyway, he showed me like proper fretting technique for a bass player, because I was trying to play like a guitar and it just wasn't working out for me. And I was still bugging my notes in like the original, in the first like tree practices. And they're all so sweet. Doug especially. It's like, yeah, you might want to try a little harder. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm trying so hard. You know, this is like this is such a monumental task to try and fill Pat's shoes, you know, and try and, you know, do the tree thing, especially because, Tree People was one of my favorite bands in the world. And anyway, so luckily with the help of the guys in the band and like my friend Dave Wall, like showing me how to fret correctly. And also I went to a Fender Mustang, which is a shorter scale bass.
Okay.
And that
Yeah.
was a lot easier. And so, oh my gosh, that kind of changed everything. And
Yeah.
then I was able to finally, be fill the space where Pat was supposed to be,
Sure.
thankfully to Doug and Scotty and then my friend Dave showing me how to play bass normally.
Sure. Yeah, wow, that is a lot of pressure to say, hey, let's bring you in this role that you might not have done before. And
Right.
I've played bass some, but I approach it as a guitar player, and whenever I do it, I kind of get slapped in the face and no, you have to think about this as a bass player. It's a separate thing,
Right. It's a different thing altogether. And just like, being a drummer, then a half-assed guitar player, then given a bass guitar, it's just like, man, it was definitely a different world. And, thankfully, Doug had the foresight to think that we were going to need a lot of rehearsal time. And so we went up to Portland, and thankfully Modest Mouse, let us use their studio to rehearse in. So we rehearsed for about, I could be wrong about the timeline, but it must have been like 8 to 10 months before we even played out live.
Sure.
We went up there a few different times, spent a couple weeks rehearsing up there at Modest Mouse studio there. And then to finally just kind of get it down. And honestly, I remember like there was some times where we were sitting together and like, we're not sure it was going to happen because we were really trying hard to sound like a real band, not sound like someone kind of going out there doing like some nostalgic trip, because Doug is just not is about nostalgia. It's just like he wanted to do this. He wanted it to sound right, and he's not some guy that kind of looks back and wants to harken back to some golden age. He's always pushing forward. And so he wanted to do this, but he wanted to kind of present it like, hey, we're still a live, viable band. And gosh, I think it was not even a month before he did our first live show, and we were listening to some of the playbacks over there at Modest Mouse Studio, and I'm like going, okay, now it sounds like we're a real band. But boy, it took us about 6 to 8 months of just really trying to get together and make that happen to feel like a band,
Yeah. That's cool to hear about the Modest Mouse connection, and practicing at a studio seems like a really good idea. I know that I got into recording because it helps you hear yourself better. And so I was recording and learning how to play music kind of at the same time. And so it's always been a little bit hand in hand like that. I think it's the best way to hear yourself is like.
Totally. You have to hear yourself, because it's just like you can spend a ton of time just jerking around in a room with your friends and stuff like that, thinking you're sounding good, until you actually hear a playback and like going, oh, there's that gap. That's kind of a boring dead spot right there. It's just like you don't even realize it because you're just trying to hang on and just do all your stuff, and everybody's focusing on their parts. But yeah, I kudos to you to doing that, because I'd encourage anybody who's like doing a band, just like, please record yourselves and listen back to it, because you'll help you just go further a lot faster if you can hear yourself back, because a lot of people start, in my opinion, I think a lot of people get in bands as fans, just like, hey, I love music, I love listening to music, I want to be in a band. And then so when you hear that critical feedback of your own stuff, it's like, oh yeah, that's kind of not cool. Maybe we should try and do something different, or maybe we have to go back to that bridge twice and stuff like that. Even though it's so much fun to play, because it can be kind of boring. It's like, oh no, that song's 5 minutes long. That's not cool.
Yeah, I would say, especially starting out, it was always a reality check to record yourself, that you don't actually sound the way that your imagination tells you do. And then, even now when you're recording and you want something to be, perfect, it's a much higher standard to hold yourself to.
Totally. And also I think that people have a critical ear about how they want to hear things and stuff that sounds cool to them. And so when you hear it back, it kind of bends that narrative to just like, okay, that doesn't sound as cool as I thought it was going to be in my head. It's like, oh, that section could be a lot shorter and stuff like that. And so it really helps your editing. It helps you get tighter. And also I think it's critical because, like, when you're young, you don't have a lot of money to go spend in the studio. And so it's just like, it really kind of helps you edit yourself down and be tighter when you go in and get stuff down.
Yeah, that sounds good. Uh, going back to the Tree People days, like kind of the original Tree People days. Do you know some of their influences? I might wonder if a band like the Replacements would have been a that and Husker Du and stuff.
Boy, you just nailed it on the head right there. Both of those bands. It's funny too, because like on the last tour, so one of the last tours where me and Doug I was driving and Doug was in the passenger seat and everybody else was kind of sleeping and stuff. And I was like, to me, the Tree People are basically like if the Replacements and the Butthole Surfers came together and made a baby, because you have the pop sensibilities of the Replacements, which is something that, I always hear through their music, but they have the cool long jam stuff, the kind of grungy jam stuff that the Butthole Surfers do,
Yeah.
And Doug was just like, you know what? I think that's probably a pretty accurate assessment of what the Tree People are like, Replacements cross the Butthole Surfers. And it's kind of makes sense because like on our last bonus tracks album that we put out, which is like kind of a compilation of all the singles that were out onto one album. They do the Flame Grape stuff, which is, a Butthole Surfers cover. And I'm like, God, that makes so much sense, because I know all those guys love the Butthole Surfers, especially Doug, and then, but also the Replacements too. So, I mean, I hear that completely. So I think that's very astute. And also, Doug loves Husker Du, listening to him play Diane on the acoustic guitar and just sing his guts out is like one of the most awesome moments that I will treasure in my life. I was over at a friend's house, like, gosh, 1993 or something. So his wife and my wife were pregnant with our kids, and Ben and my daughter Madeline are just 2 weeks apart. And he did Diane, on the guitar, and it was just, and it was just amazing. And just so yeah, I totally get that.
Cool. Yeah. So I would say I learned about a lot of music through the covers and the cover sets that he's done and that kind of a thing, and just learning about those networks. And I got to be a fan of the Replacements because a lot of what I like about Built to Spill and Doug's music I see there, it can be rough around the edges sometimes, but then it's like pretty sincere and nostalgic sometimes too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because he has a reverential feeling towards that. I don't want to say it's classic rock, but it's kind of like that older rock, like Replacement stuff, but he has a way to give it a modern bent, which is still why I'm a huge Built to Spill fan to this day. Just like even listening to all the stuff that he does and just how he pushes himself to do different things, especially when he brought on the Brazil guys and stuff like that. And, it's not always an easy thing. They had some rough shows, but they also had shows that were just amazing, just like watching him go through that process. And also, honestly, it's kind of true to what he wanted to do initially with the Built to Spill thing, with like kind of a rotating lineup and stuff like that. Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to argue with anybody. I loved like the big 5-piece lineup. I mean,
me too. I was a huge fan.
I always love that stuff. And I love the 3-piece stuff because I love watching Doug just try and stretch over the top and try and make everything and fill up that space, But it was cool to kind of have the Brazil guys in there because it was yet another way for him to push himself to kind of make and present his music in a different format. And, it was nice to have a second guitar player there and stuff like that to kind of fill in the cool, pretty melodies and stuff like that. But I'm just, kind of like you, I'm just a huge fan altogether. And so I can find things to enjoy and all that stuff. So,
Yeah. People online sometimes are super big about rating albums or time periods or whatever. And I do have to agree that I don't know if any lineup can beat the 3 amazing guitar players, out front. But I told Brett that one of the songs that probably hooked me into all of Doug's music was Twin Falls, and it that is kind of a Bus 8 like song, and then I learned to appreciate pretty much everything else. And I think I wanted to ask about with There Is No Enemy. Did you feel like a lot of the themes in that was reacting to losing Pat and possibly it would have been possibly handling Andy Capp's passing away too, and that kind of a thing.
I think so. And it's funny because honestly, I felt that mostly because of the Pat song, but I started to kind of look closer at the material from that album, and started to think that maybe it was kind of like a revisiting of that, and and Andy Caps is another. He's a really good friend of mine, and I miss him terribly, and I love the fact that that they still do Car and stuff like that and play that song, because that is just the ultimate Andy Caps song. But yeah, I think you're correct. I think, but the only thing that kind of surprised me is that it took that long to kind of get to that point to revisit that. But also, I mean, that shit was so raw for all of us, that maybe it took that long to finally come to a place where he could revisit it and present it in a way that was, I don't know, really perfect, honestly, Yeah. And it was still raw enough that I couldn't continue driving my car when I heard the Pat song, just like,
sure.
Just like that stuff was always in the back of our minds, having those guys, in the back of our heads. So even when we're doing stuff now, and then like have it come back then, for that album was, it was perfect. And gosh, I don't know. Again, Doug's a friend of mine, and but at the same time, I'm a huge fan of his, and so it seems like. It's like whatever he does just seems so perfect at the moment. It's
yeah.
When he brought that up, and when Pat, that it just seemed like the perfect time to bring that up, and let's talk about it. Let's revisit it. Let's feel it, And it's funny because he's not that calculated of a person. He doesn't think like that. Like, oh, I'm going to wait this long to do this thing. It just he's kind of the guy. Just like it just came up and it happened. It just felt right.
Yeah.
And kind of just like that guy. He just happens to make it happen at the time when it feels right to do, and it resonates. And I'm super thankful for it, But I remember like when I first started playing with Tree People, and because even though I was friends with them, we didn't hang out all the time and stuff. And so when we were hanging out a lot, I was just asking like, so where'd your lyrics come from? And why is this happening and stuff like that? And he's like, my lyrics, I just try not to sound stupid.
Yeah.
And he was just really being honest. He's just like, really not trying to, be profound or anything. I just don't want to sound dumb. I just want to try and sound cool, And he's just like, it just felt right at the moment, and he's always just right there in the moment. When you're talking to about anything, he's right there with you. He's not looking forward to the next moment. He's not thinking about what happened in the past. He's right there with you, and he's being super genuine and honest, and it's a super vulnerable thing, and so I just kind of really got more of that sense the more I hung out with him, that he's really kind of just a guy who kind of just feels the moment and expresses it. And thankfully for me and for you, it's been great, I super appreciate stuff that he's done,
Yeah, I just think to that album as, it's kind of a darker album. I sort of interpreted the title to be a little bit political and kind of remind people that there might be a lot of things that like people are scared and worried about, but that there is not always something to worry about.
Right.
And a song like Things Fall Apart, it did really help me learn how to grieve some stuff that I was going through. And so it's cool that I'm sure other people took it the same way.
What I like about his songs too is like when he was telling me that, just like it kind of validated the fact that stuff that I've read into his lyrics and the way that's impacted me over the years and stuff like that I feel comfortable knowing that like my interpretation of whatever his song was is not wrong, because it is for me, and I love that his songs are that open that you can do that, and they still belong to me personally, no matter how they how they help someone get through a day or whatever and stuff like that, how they helped you go through a grieving process. And that they weren't like, he didn't tell me like, oh no, this song is about this day, this happened on this particular time and this person I interacted with. It's just like, I'm glad that I still have that open interpretation for myself, and And also maybe purposely I didn't dig too much deeper because, I want to keep that stuff for myself too, because his songs mean something to me and they mean something to you and they mean something to a lot of people. And, some of the most moving stuff that ever happened to me is like 2007. I saw those guys play. I was working like back east in Virginia, and I went and saw them down in North Carolina, and then I went and I was living outside of DC, and so I went and saw them at the 930 Club. And both cities in North Carolina and also in DC, they ended their sets, even though it was they did what was the album? What was their first album on major label?
Would that be Perfect From Now On?
Yeah, Perfect From Now On. Yeah, they did the album from top to, and then they did like basically 7 or 8 songs afterwards. But the last song was Car. And everybody was singing the song.
Yeah.
And even though I'd Built to Spill, and these are my friends and guys I kind of grew up with, stuff like that, but being in like a different city completely and listening to the entire crowd sing the song, the lyrics with them, it was powerful. It's just like, to me, that like that song meant probably a different thing to everybody else in the crowd, but it just resonated. God, I was so proud. I just like, God, it's just like local boy does good, it's so great,
Yeah, it's awesome. I think, I'm not sure if I mentioned before, but it really sounds like his artistic instincts seem to be really good timing, and he seems to put a lot of care into perfecting things and polishing things how he wants them. And
for sure.
That's how they end up.
It's funny too, because like when we were practicing with Tree People, one thing I was talking to some of my friends about, like, I don't know, like when you're playing in a band with your friends, it's like, and you play a song and it comes off okay, no one stopped, everybody got from the beginning to from the beginning to the end, and we just got through it, and it felt good, it was fun. It was like move on to the next song. Doug was kind of like, what, this middle part, it kind of didn't sound exactly right, and I remember even like when I was singing back, so I first started playing with Tree People, I was singing a lot of backups because I hear doubling in his vocals in a lot of Tree People songs. And so, and I was kind of designated as like being the backup singer. And so I was singing a lot, like singing, like doubling a lot of his stuff. And he sent me an email, and I didn't read it for days until like the last days we're rehearsing, like the first round, saying, hey, don't sing backups all the time, just, let it happen and stuff. And so it's funny because like I didn't read it till the last day. I'm like, oh, Doug, I'm so sorry. You sent that email like on the second day, and here we're on day 7, and I'm still like singing the backups you told me not to sing, stuff like that. But at the same time, he's very particular about how he wants to hear things, just like he wants to sound, because I have a sound in my head and I want it to kind of represent what we're doing. And he records everything that we do. He has this little recorder he carries around with him. And so he recorded every band practice, everything we did, all the rehearsals, even just like me, Scotty, and Doug without Wayne, we'd get together at my house and just like rehearse in my music room. And he'd always record everything. And he'd always have kind of like notes and just like, I remember Brett Netson gave us some shit. Like when we first started, we announced that, we were going to start doing this Tree People stuff. So we'll get ready to rehearse because Doug likes to rehearse, and he does, but honestly, at the very end, it makes you feel good, because I'm sure, as you being someone who's performed, when you're rehearsed and your part, you kind of get past the nerves, because you kind of fall back to like, what, this is what I've done through. I'm just going to go through it. Just like I've rehearsed this. I know, whatever the crowd reaction is going to be, at least I know that I've rehearsed enough that I don't have to worry about it. And Doug's like that. And he's like the soft perfectionist. He's not like super mean or anything about that. He's just like, hey, you know what? Let's just do that again.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you've played bus number 8 like 7 times in a row,
Yeah.
And so it's just like, it wasn't like he was saying, like he wasn't being mean about it. Just like, hey, let's do it again. It's like, all right. So we just do it again and do it again and do it again and do it again, and it wasn't mean. It was just like we got through it. And just like at the very end, like, oh my gosh, we rehearsed like 2.5 hours,
Yeah.
But he is very detail oriented like that,
Yeah, I feel like I can relate to that for sure. I was doing some open mic stuff a few years ago before the pandemic happened, and I had partnered up with somebody, and I wanted to do a song, and we were playing through it, and like, nobody was in the audience, but I was like, I don't know if I want to perform that right now. I want to keep practicing and making sure it's good. And yeah, I mean, so rehearsal is so integral to being good. And a lot of the rock star images, oh, we don't care, we don't rehearse sometimes, but rehearsal is king when it comes to being good.
Well, and also think of it this way, just like I was talking to Doug about like the first time that he went overseas and opened for the Foo Fighters, and as Built to Spill, and that was some of his probably not favorite times of playing in Built to Spill, because in his mind he was just like, we weren't good. I knew we weren't good. People were kind of shitting on us because we were opening for Foo Fighters and stuff like that. And he goes, I couldn't argue with them because I didn't feel good about it. And it's only because they didn't have enough time to, rehearse enough to go overseas and, make that stuff happen. And honestly, if you listen to any of those videos on YouTube, it's like, they're not bad, just like they're pretty deep, performances. But, even now we're talking like, this is just like what, a couple of years ago, and I was talking about this, and he still remembers this. It's just like, we didn't rehearse, we didn't do it, and he switched, he could do it over again, just like, or just rehearse. He wishes he had had enough time to rehearse to make the band tighter, Yeah. And so it still resonates with them now, shoot, that was a long time ago. Things about that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I had heard, I think it was through Brett Nelson, he talked about the very first Built to Spill show and then the tour to Europe as being times that reinforced that rehearsing and trying to push for like a higher standard kind of thing. And you do remember those lessons kind of in, whatever job you might have, you kind of remember the huge mistakes you made early on a lot later.
Well, Doug also said to me, he says, he goes, I wouldn't even given a shit if people hated us. He says, if I knew the band was rad, he goes, I wouldn't have cared, but I knew the band wasn't rad. So it really kind of like really stuck to me, that they were kind of not liking our stuff. He goes, because I wasn't liking it either. He says, so I kind of almost identified with their negative view of us, because if we'd been tight and rad, he goes, I wouldn't have given a shit what they said about us, I think that's why his rehearsal ethic comes from now. Just like, let's rehearse the shit out of this stuff. Let's feel good about it with each other, hang out, do the shit, be friends, be cool and stuff like that, and just go out there and just do our thing, And I think that's why that his forethought of like when he was putting together the Tree People thing again, which is like, all right, we're gonna need like 8 to 10 months of rehearsal before we put this in front of people, But I will say this though, I also kind of balance that also with the punk rock ethos, where some of my friends' bands are just like, oh, we need to rehearse more and stuff like that. But I hear something that's really great, I'm like, you guys need to get this shit out there right now. So it's a delicate balance, So I'm not going to say it's 100% the way, but I will say this: it works for Doug, and I have complete faith, and I follow him into battle anywhere, because of success that we had with the Tree People and stuff like that. I'm like, oh, this is totally the way we should do it, And so I do have a lot of faith in that. And also just being a performer, just like, the more rehearsed you are, the better you are and stuff like that. But also, I also kind of err on the other side too. It's like, I don't want to be too precious about it because like, I don't want to like miss out on an opportunity because, I'm hand-wringing over a particular section or something like that. But in this case, for the Tree People, and also I think for Built to Spill, the rehearsal ethic has definitely paid off.
Sometimes the rawness or the spontaneity early on that's where all the good stuff comes from. And I would say There's Nothing Wrong with Love is one of my favorite albums, and it has a lot of that later on with Perfect From Now On or Keep It Like a Secret, they polish so much that they don't have like that raw solo in Dystopian Dream Girl quite anymore,
Also I think that has a lot to do with just because of my friend Andy Capps, it's just like, he just didn't have the attention span, in my opinion. I mean, I could be completely wrong about this. Just like, he was pretty much just like in his band Splinter and stuff like that, just like, let's get it down, get it on tape. And if, some of the guys like, oh, let's do it again. And he'd be like, nope, that's it. We caught the energy on the first couple takes and that's it, and that, they weren't going to go beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of like driving energy. So I think that was kind of like sort of energy coming from that album too, was Andy Caps, where it's like later, I think Doug, and again, I'm just my own personal view on this. I can't say it's 100% accurate, that
Sure.
he was able to actually, practice and get that stuff down, because Andy was a strong personality too. Andy was strong personality like Pat was too.
Yeah.
So just like I kind of imagine that some of that rawness that comes from that first album or second album was definitely an Andy Caps influence,
Cool. Yeah. Hearing that, I can see how it's kind of the colliding of their two philosophies, that Doug wanted to write the perfect songs and Andy only wanted to do them a couple times, and
Right. Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
That's the feeling I get, just because, as much as I knew Andy and stuff like that, just, also his other band Splinter, which is amazing band too. But have you heard Splinter?
I don't think so. I need to check out them and any other bands that I might not have heard about.
I will send you a link, because Trent McNair actually digitized all of their stuff, and it's on SoundCloud.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll send you a link to it, because that band is really great too, and it's got a huge Andy influence in it throughout, And
Awesome.
also I've heard the Fall Downs. That was his other band afterwards, with like Eric Penny. Eric Penny played in the Oatmeal Snakes with Brett Netson and stuff like Brett Nelson. And so that was Fall Downs was another great, pop punk band right before he passed. So
so I did, like, early on when I was digging into side projects, I came across Butterfly Train, which I gather was Brett Nelson, Andy Caps, and then when I was researching for my
Andy Caps wasn't in Butterfly Train.
Okay.
Caps, but anyway, but yeah, that's a kind of sort of that same sort of feel and stuff like that. But yeah, Andy Caps wasn't in Butterfly Train, but but it's kind of like, what's amazing is those three guys playing together on that one album. I mean, such huge artistic forces, all three of them,
Mm-hmm.
And then and honestly, Andy probably being in a more diminished role in that band than he was later in like Splinter or the Fall Downs and stuff, and you can kind of hear that influence that he brought to Built to Spill in those later bands, But anyway, I will send you those links and stuff like that, just so you can just hear it.
Sure.
And point out a couple songs that I think are really great.
Okay. That sounds good. And speaking of that, I'm pretty sure I had heard all of No Mouth Pipetting, but I wanted to try to hear that again.
You have a record player?
I don't. They're selling digital copies now, I think, from what I had heard.
Well, we're selling a CD of it for sure.
Okay.
I can't remember the website right now, but
sure.
Anyway, I can get you links to that too. So
okay.
Or if you have a CD player, I can send you a CD of it.
Okay. That would be awesome. And so I can include the links to all of that stuff too in the show notes, because it's
okay. Yeah.
Related
I'll
to
all that stuff. Yeah.
So yeah. I'm curious. Have you kept in touch with Doug in this latest album that I've heard a little bit about?
I'm a little bit. It's just like about last summer. Was kind of maybe it was actually before the lockdown, because it was before we had to wear masks.
Mm-hmm.
I went over to his place, and I went over, and he had like the mixer board set up and speakers in his living room and stuff. And he was just like, I'm trying to work through it, and Doug's like, I'm just so lazy. I just, trying to get through this stuff. And he played me some cool sounding stuff, and it was just like, it was rad, but I haven't heard anything put together yet.
Sure.
And so we had lunch, and he was talking about like, what the plans were for the album. But then like, the coronavirus really hit us. And so that kind of derailed some of the stuff. And
well, I'm just super curious about it as a fan. I'm really looking forward to it.
I'm so looking forward to it. Just like, and it's like, and of course he was playing the music And I was hoping he was going to like maybe sing or hum something along with it or stuff like that, but he wasn't. He wouldn't give it. And I'm just like, oh man, that's why we hear that stuff, you know?
Yeah.
The music, great, you know?
Yeah. So it's a little bits and pieces have sort of been shared over social media from what I gather, kind of teaser things. I heard there was a really neat thing where I think there were samples of backwards guitar and somebody was playing it with a mixer to almost like a mellotron, bringing the faders up and that kind of a thing. And then I think there was a mellotron like iPad app or something that might have been involved. So yeah, I've been paying attention to a lot of those little teasers. So I was talking with Brett, and I've really been hoping and wanting to try to interview him too, but then I understand that he's super busy with setting up appearances, finishing an album, all that kind of stuff. So I'm hoping that maybe that is something that could happen in the future. But I was wondering, are there maybe other people in Tree People that might be interested in talking?
Oh, totally. You know who you should talk to is Wayne Flower. I mean, that's a guy that has tons of information, and honestly, he'll talk your ear off, and he's so rad. And so I will I'll text him and let him know and give him the information that you're wanting to talk with him.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that would be great. It's been amazing, this little podcast thing. I mean, it just started out me wanting to analyze songs and share it, and then I connected through a couple members of Built to Spill in a fan group, and I reached out and I was like, "Hey, like Brett, would you like to talk?" And he's like, "Sure." And then and I really looked up to Jim Roth as a guitar player. I learned how to make pedals because of him. And I play guitar because of Built to Spill, basically, and so it's amazing that I'm getting to talk to these people.
Yeah, it was cool. It was funny to like listen to you guys talk about like some of the talking about the discrete components of your pedals and stuff like that, and how they work. I was like, that was pretty interesting. I liked it a lot, you know, because you know, I'm an engineer and stuff like that, but but I'm not an electrical engineer. So it's just funny that I could hearing you guys talk about some of these things. That was interesting to me. So
cool.
Sure. You know, what's really great about the Built to Spill community and just, you know, all of us in Boise and stuff like that is we're all pretty open and willing to talk about whatever, you know, and so you say you're trying to get a hold of Netson. You want to get a hold of Netson or?
So I messaged him through the Instagram app and he responded, and he said he would be interested. I was asking about when he might be available, and he didn't quite get back to me on that. One thing I'm really careful about in each of these is I want to try to connect with the people in a way that they feel comfortable with. And if social media and like new stuff isn't, I'm fine doing, you know, whatever else.
I will tell you this though, you really need to get Wayne on here. Wayne is a great interview, and you know, he has really great insights and all this stuff. I mean, plus he was there from the beginning, you know, and stuff, and his music blog kind of just gives you an idea of just how well he's able to remember all this stuff, and he's a great conversationalist and stuff like that. I think you'd really have a good conversation with Wayne for sure. And then Scotty too. Scotty Smalljohn is awesome and stuff. So I mean, those two guys are definitely open books, you know. Netson cool. I can understand because he's so busy and stuff, and especially when he's working and stuff like right now, it's probably harder for him to maybe find a spot to make that happen. But Scotty and Wayne are pretty available all the time.
Yeah, I totally understand people being busy. The people that I have been able to talk to, I kind of have to think the crazy, strange situation of the pandemic. Everybody has a lot of time to sit down and talk, and would like to have people to talk to, and so that's kind of been a great time for that. So again, thanks for stopping by. Is there anything else you want to talk about Tree People? I might not have been so thorough with the questions this time.
The only thing I'll mention is that State of Confusion actually they're putting out they're re-releasing their album A Street. Through the same label that we're kind of selling the CD for No Mouth Pipetting through. Mm-hmm. That's coming out in, I want to say May or June or something like that. They were doing some pre-sales for it. So it's a great rock and roll album. And also they're going to be doing some other re-releases of 6.3 million acres, which was the album before A Street, and some demo tape stuff. And so anybody who's a fan of the Tree People and wants to hear like the stuff where that came from, the pre-stuff, State of Confusion, that stuff's coming out soon. So I'd encourage people to keep an eye out for that. And I'll definitely share those links for you too when those come up.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I had heard a little bit about those things in relation to it might have been the same account that I saw the No Mouth Pipetting stuff that was being released.
Exactly. Same label.
Okay. Nice. Thanks again for your time. And I really appreciate the stories.
You bet, man.
Thanks.